So, uh, if you're from Dominica or have close ties to Dominica, our next guest will be no stranger to you. He is a true patriot who has found great success in his career here in the US, but is constantly giving back to his island home. We are very honored to be joined by Mr. Felix Augustine. Felix is a professional mass communications expert and photographer. He is an area director at the United States Tennis Open and the primary photographer for JP Morgan Chase Philanthropic Department. He spends much of his time traveling the world, well, at least when the world was open, performing photography service to a wide variety of clients. Felix, again, thank you for taking time out to be with us today. And I want to say welcome to the program today.
Thank you very, very, very much for inviting me and your kind words that you so eloquently read out to me. So I really appreciate all the accolades and all the good things that you just said about me. And I'm not going to pay you anything for it.
And if anything, I actually owe you because I have certainly benefited from your generosity towards Dominicans, because I don't know if you remember, but back around 2008, when I was on another venture of trying to promote our culture with Kai Videos, you were one of the people who was very instrumental in kind of guiding me how to do videography and also how not to get sued for copyright infringement. So I'm not sure if you remember this.
Right. Yeah, I actually do. And actually, that was a pretty commendable effort on your part. That was pretty good, what you were doing. I mean, part of, what I think is kind of my mandate, and it's a personally imposed mandate, is to help other people, and particularly people from Dominica, people, just help pull them up, just like I think I was able to do for myself, So I think all of us sometimes we need a little bit of a little jolt, a little push, and so I take pleasure in helping anybody that I possibly can. So, I did it with all the pleasure in the world.
Yes, certainly so. And so let's just go back to a little bit about life in Dominica. So what are some of the challenges you faced as you tried to become a media specialist in the work that you did in Dominica?
I think for me at the time, there was a period in time when I was trying to figure out what sort of a career path that I wanted to go on. And so I think in Dominica, and particularly at the time that, we grew up, there was not a lot of diversity in terms of career options, either people speaking about them or they being available on the island. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So let's say in Dominica, you wanted to be an attorney, right? Very few people mention the wide array of attorney options there are. You're either a criminal attorney or some sort of family attorney. You'd never heard people speaking about business attorneys and the whole array of attorney types that there possibly are. So that was one of the challenging things for me at the time, is because I found out that I wanted to do communications. And again, I found it out by accident, but I didn't know what that meant. And at the time, communications in Dominica meant either you're working on the radio or you're working in a newspaper. But as I have come to find out that there are so many different types of communication and so many different aspects that you can go into. And so to me, that was a little bit of a challenge. And so obviously growing up, I naturally gravitated towards news, because at the time that pretty much was the type of communication type that was widely available to us. So I became a news reporter, a newspaper reporter. But later on, as I found various different types of communications, I gravitated to other areas, and it's been interesting. And I think, not just think, but I hope that a lot of our people down there help kids to understand that if you want to become a farmer, for instance, you don't just necessarily have to become a banana farmer. There's so many different types of farming that you can do. And so this to me was a challenge. And I hope, maybe with this interview, and I'm sure by now they should have been doing that, but I think now just opening kids and people to all of the possibilities there are, and not just limiting yourself to a certain thing.
Yeah, and that's what I was actually going to say as well. It sounds like you're saying don't limit yourself. And I think that a lot of that comes with doing research, because I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that once you realize, news reporting wasn't really for you, I'm sure you spent some time looking into electronic media, which I know that's the next step that you took. So how did you go about that process? How did you discover that was an option to pursue?
Well, I'll take you back just a little bit and kind of put it in context for you. I was attending grammar school at the time, and my class was tasked with doing the General Assembly at the school. And so I had to read the scriptures. And so once I began reading, all the other folks had already done their part, and it was my turn to read the scriptures. And so once I began reading, the entire student body started to applaud. And I found that really, really weird, because I had never seen that before. And so, because I wasn't done. I was like literally like a couple sentences into my reading. And so I remember very, very, very vividly, as I sit here right now, going back to my classroom, and I told my friend McDonald Fontaine, who was sitting on the same bench with me in grammar school, I say, "Dude, I just found out what I want to do in life." And he asked me, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, did you hear the crowd?" So I was like, "I know what I want to do. I just found out." I said, "I want to communicate." Now, at the time, I had absolutely no idea what that communication meant. I just knew that my task, my job from here on was I was going to talk to people. And so what I did is, from that day, I became a sponge for everything communication. So I wanted to learn, the different types, because there was nobody else telling me anything about it. So I did my research, and I started to learn about newspaper reporting and television reporting and all of those different forms of reporting. Again, I'm still micro, because at that time I still don't even know all the various forms. I didn't know that you could go into a business and do corporate communications and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't know any of that kind of stuff. I just knew that you were going to work in the radio, in the newspaper, the TV. And again, in Dominica at the time, those options were very, very limited, because just of the size and the number that's available to us. So I said, man, I know what I'm going to do. And so I started going out, and I would take a newspaper, and now I'm reading a newspaper, but I'm not looking at the newspaper like everybody else. I'm reading it, trying to figure out, like, how is it that they put this story together? The who, the where, the why, the how, when. That's the kind of stuff that I was trying to. And again, that's all in my little naive mind, because I'm not being taught communications at all. I'm just trying to figure out how. So when I looked at TV, I was looking at TV with, like, how did they do that? The radio, like, how did they put it together? So that's what I started to do. So once I graduated from grammar school, I remember it was I graduated, was like, I think graduation was like on a Friday. On a Monday morning, I got up and I went to the newspaper, in the New Chronicle newspaper, and I went to the manager at the time, Anthony White, and I said, Mr. White, I'd like to work for you. And then he says, well, what do you mean? I'm like, I just graduated on Friday, but I want to work in communications. And again, I'm still using the word communications, because I want to communicate. I want to work for you. But the thing is, the Chronicle at the time was just the first of the stops on that day, because again, I'm still thinking of the three forms: the radio, the television, and the newspaper. So the newspaper just happened to be the first one that I went to because of the proximity to where the bus stop was. And well, we don't have any vacancies. We don't have any vacancies. So I said, well, Mr. White, you don't even understand. I'm going to work for you for free. I want to work in the newspaper. So he's still baffled, and he's looking at me, at this little kid talking about want to work for me, comes to this major newspaper, the only newspaper in Dominica, right out of school. And so he says, all right, write something for me. And so he gave me something, and then I went home and I wrote something. At the time, I was neighbors with Leonard Slinton, who worked on Marpin at the time. And I said, hey, I got to write a story. I got my ideas, but can you walk me through that process? And I wrote something, and the next day I went by the New Chronicle, and I presented, and I told them that I know exactly what I want or how I want to do it and stuff like that. And then that's how I started. I started working at the New Chronicle newspaper, not getting paid a dime, just because I knew that I wanted to. And
Wow.
It didn't take very long. Yeah, it didn't take very long. And then after that, I figured I still want to experiment, because Mark, I haven't been to college, I haven't been anywhere. So I want to experiment what the other forms of media communications are. And so that's where the curiosity continued. And wanted me to go and try other things. And
So
I can give you the story of how I ended up at, the next one. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is truly fascinating, because it's almost like it was a mustard seed that was planted in you.
Yeah.
And it sounds, I don't want to sound too spiritual, but it sounds like divine intervention, that out of that one simple experience of presenting at an assembly in school, that it sparked a complete interest, something that you completely immersed yourself in. And to this day, you're still passionate about communications. So I think that kind of tells us the importance of paying attention and grabbing on to what comes naturally to us, what we think is, our true passion, because that is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, the fact that you took your passion for communicating and turned it into a career. So let's kind of jump ahead and talk about your experiences from going from receiving your bachelor's degree and then landing a job with MTV in New York City. I mean, how did that come about?
Well, that's, again, is another fascinating story. So in 2000, at the turn of the millennium, a friend of mine who lived in Chicago at the time was amassing representatives from around the world. And so her job was to get two people from every country in the world to go to Chicago for the Millennium celebrations, right? So the year before that, in 1999, I met this gentleman who came down to Dominica for the World Creole Music Festival. And so he came over to he saw me at a news conference. I was the camera guy at that news conference. And when he went home that night, at his hotel that night, he turned on his TV, and he saw the GIS news. So he started watching the news. So at the end of the news, he was looking at the credits. And so he saw my name as the script writer, the director, the everything on the news. Again, because in Dominica, we have so many small staff, you just have a couple people. So you have to be really, really talented, and at least I think talented, and be able to do a multitude of things. And so he met me the following day at a news conference, and he says, hey, he'd like to introduce himself. And he says, look, man, I work in New York, and I do this, and I have never in my life in New York or wherever seen somebody do so many things. And he says, well, I'd like you to come to New York. And I says, well, how am I going to do that? Because I don't have visa, I don't have any of that kind of stuff. And I mean, I haven't been to school anywhere. And so he said, well, the day that you can, when you get to New York, give me a call. Well, I always tell people, if you don't mean what you're gonna tell me, don't even tell it to me, because you're gonna it's gonna come back to haunt you. So anyway, in 2000, I ended up getting that opportunity to go to Chicago. So on my way to Chicago, or from Chicago, I stopped off in New York, and I called him and I say, hey, remember that conversation? I'm in New York. So he said, here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to take you across to MTV. I have a very good friend at MTV who runs MTV. I'm going to introduce you to somebody. So he introduced me to the senior vice president of MTV.
Wow.
And this was a lady who had done a lot of projects with him at the time, right? So this lady, starts speaking to me, and I was amazed that, the senior vice president of MTV is meeting with me, little old nobody from Dominica. So, anyways, I met this lady and I says, hey, I've been looking at your channel and stuff like that. Again, I did some research, and I think, based on what I've seen, I think you guys can change this. I think you guys can do this. I think you guys can do that. And this lady is looking at me like, the audacity of this guy, like, who is he? And anyways, so she says, well, based on the conversation that we've had, there's not much that she could do for me at the time, because I didn't have a visa, I didn't have a work permit, I didn't have anything to be in this country. So she says, well, I can't even give you an internship because you're not in school or anything like that. So there's nothing I can do for you. So again, she made a promise. She says, hey, but if you ever get some kind of documentation and you're legal to work here, then, we can have a conversation. I don't know why she said that, but she said that, and I held to it. So what happened is I went back to Dominica, and I kid you not, for the next, I think it was been about a year or two, yes, because I left in 2002 and I was in 2000. For the next 2 years, I wrote this lady an email, right, every single month for 2 years, just reminding her of this promise. So I left the Dominica, and I actually had so the Labour Party came in, and then Rosie Douglas was in charge, and then I was flying everywhere with Rosie doing his stuff. And I say, hey, Rosie, I think I want to go study. And then Rosie says, you know what, stay and work with me for a year, and then you can leave, because I like what you do. Now, this is the Prime Minister of the country. So I said, all right. Rosie died in office, right? But a year into my thing, he died in office. So I was like, man, what am I gonna do? Because I had a promise with the Prime Minister of the country, right? Anyways, we fast forward, and I left, and I came to New York, and I went to school up in Plattsburgh, and I took, out of the 4 years that you get to do the degree, I did my entire degree in 3 years. I didn't attend a single summer class. I was just pushing credits. I was doing, a gazillion number of credits, because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I just wanted a document that says that, hey, I qualified to do it. And so after that, the day I was 1 week before graduation, I sent this lady. I was sending her again. I'm still, up until that time, still sending her regular emails. And I sent her an email, and I said, hey, I'm graduating next week from Plattsburgh State University with my bachelor's degree in mass media communications. And she said to me, there is no way that I will not do everything that I possibly can to make sure that you got a job, because I've never seen this in my life. That this is not even determination. This is on another level. So she told me to come down to MTV, and she gave me like about 3 or 4 departments. And she told me to go speak to those different heads of those departments. And based on the conversations, you guys will figure out how and where best you fit. And that's how I ended up with the music events and specials department at MTV, working on the music awards and the movie awards, and doing all of MTV's live productions around the country.
Wow, that is truly a fascinating story. I mean, have you ever
Yeah,
thought of writing a book or making a movie out of yourself? Because who would believe that? That here you are, like what we
I
would call
know, I
a
know.
nobody from Dominica. And, I
Nobody.
think what
Yeah,
that speaks to,
yeah.
Felix, is always putting forth your
Mm,
best work. Always putting forth your
absolutely,
best work,
absolutely.
because you simply do not know who is watching, who
Yeah,
is listening, who is
yeah,
observing you, and what type of opportunities are going to come from the right person.
you know,
It only takes
it,
one person. Did you realize that? It only took
it only takes
one
one person.
person to see what you were
Yes,
doing and to be able to
one person.
say, I like what you're doing, and I would love to have you on board. Now, tell me, was there any challenges for you being from
Yeah,
Dominica and now working in the States? Did you find any challenges with working for MTV?
absolutely. There were a lot of challenges. One in particular, or it's a combination of things, but one in particular is we think that we know so much in Dominica,
Mm.
but when we come here, it's almost a whole new
It
thing.
is.
Like, all the things that you thought you knew, it's like a completely different ball game. So
Right.
again, and I've even told that to some of my friends from Dominica who've told me, hey, like say they're a cameraman in Dominica and they want to come here. I'm like, hey, a cameraman in Dominica and a cameraman here is a totally different thing. When you get here, you don't
Absolutely.
even think that you're a cameraman anymore, because the kind of professionalism and stuff like that that you're going to experience is out of this world. So that to me was one of the challenges, because I came from a situation where I thought I had a lot of practical knowledge because, like I said, I came directly from high school, went into the field, never having been to school for it for a day. And here it is that I am doing all of these things. And so, what the biggest challenge was being able to speak the same language with a lot of the professionals here. And once I was able to be able to speak that language and to understand all of the jargons and to be able to blend in, that's when a certain level of comfort started to get in, and a certain self-belief. Because, we can say what we want, but until we're able to get down to that person who is talking to us, we're almost ineffective, because if we can't communicate, we can't speak, and they're not able to understand what we're saying, what's the point?
Right.
And so
And I think
sometimes, a lot of times, we're in a little bit of a cocoon, in a bubble. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that
Mhm.
also lends itself to being willing to learn. Because, for example, I know
Mhm.
someone who is
Absolutely.
so fantastic at interior design, event planning, those
Mhm.
sorts of, decorative
Mhm.
events. And, I keep encouraging her that without that degree, without a certificate to show
Mhm.
that you understand the theory, you understand, you can speak the language of the professionals, you will simply remain where you
Yep.
are. And
Right.
it's interesting that you say that, because you had the
You know.
practical knowledge back in Dominica, but you
Yep.
recognize that without
Yep.
earning a degree, that you are going to limit yourself. And as soon as you
Mhm.
earn the degree, look at how the opportunities just open up for you.
Yep.
So I kind of think it speaks to a lot of people
Yep.
who know what they want to do, they're passionate about what they want to do, but they do not recognize the importance of having a certificate, having a degree, just something to say that you're a professional and you're qualified to do that work. So I'm really happy that we're having this conversation.
What I'd like to add to this is, I've told this to a lot of people, and I've even had that conversation with my son. And what I've mentioned is the fact that the certificate, while you have a lot of skills, right? Unless you're extraordinary and something that you've done falls by accident into the right hands, the most effective way of opening any door is through that piece of paper, because that is the first
Absolutely.
piece of anything that they're going to be able to judge you on. again, if you happen to put something on YouTube and it ends up becoming a sensation, and again, this is lightning striking kind of scenario here, then that's a different ball game, because you went in through the back door and it worked for you. That's fine. But there's no way that you're going to end up, for instance, in, let's take any JP Morgan Chase, for instance, as an example, that you're going to end up in JP Morgan by just accident, without sending in some piece of paper that, hey, I am qualified to do this. Again, on up saying some picture that you took or some article that you wrote or something, and says, hey, this is the person that I need. What's the chance of that happening? So again, I believe that the piece of paper is critical to a lot of the different things. Now, again, there's some things that I think and career paths that I think that you don't necessarily need to have it. But again, it's good to have it, but not necessarily an absolute need. But a lot of situations where you do need to have something that gets you into the door. Once you get into the door, then you can put your skills to play, but you need to be able to get through the door.
And I also think that it speaks to you being disciplined, because it takes a lot of discipline, especially in your case, when you did your degree in 3 years. It speaks to the fact that if I employ you, I know that you're disciplined enough to finish what you started. Going to college is certainly not a walk in the park, let's just face it. But to be able to have the tenacity to be able to complete each class, go to classes every day, take the exams, deal with the frustration, the lack of sleep, it speaks to your character. So I'm certainly going to want to employ you in that case.
Yeah, no, I was going to give you a scenario for me. When I left, so once I started working in Dominica, I said I was going to give myself a couple of years of just getting experience and then go back to college. That couple of years morphed into over 10 years.
Yes.
So when I went back to college, I hadn't been in a classroom for over 10 years.
Wow.
Now, this was never the plan, but that's just how it worked out. And so when I got into college, I remember the very first day that I walked in on campus, and they showed me where my room was, and I was going to have to share a room with somebody and stuff like that. And I said, man, I took a look at myself and I said, look at me, man. I mean, I was in Dominica. I was very, very comfortable. I was on TV. I was okay, and here I am on campus in this country. I am nobody. I am walking down the street. I'm walking on campus. Nobody says hello. Nobody says Felix, something that I couldn't just do in Dominica without somebody saying, hey, Felix, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Nothing whatsoever. And so you're right when you mentioned discipline, because it took me taking a walk on campus that very first day and walking back to my room and saying, hey, this is where you are now. This is the opportunity that you have now. What you gonna do about it? Forget about everything in the past. Forget about all of this thing. It's a new start. And so from that day, I just remember that was it. It was the beginning of the end.
Yeah, and it speaks very well to being humble and being able to start from the bottom, because
Absolutely.
There you are, you had already made a name for yourself in Dominica. You could have simply ran with that and just been the top of the top in Dominica, maybe venture out to other Caribbean islands. But you had a dream and you had a goal to come to America and make something even bigger of yourself. So I think through humility and being able to start all over again, it kind of shows the importance of not being stuck in, your title and your ego and your esteem, and being able to want to try again. Now, you've certainly had a very illustrious career, I have to say. So what drove your decision to move from MTV to BET? It seems like you've been everywhere, Felix.
Was over at MTV. I went back to the to the same lady who, by that time, we had become very good friends, even better friends. And I told her that at the time, um, there was talk of a new network being formed, and with the MTV that was going to cater to a Caribbean audience. So I went over. So it was supposed to be Tempo. So I went over to this. I went to do an interview with the guy who at the time was running Tempo, and that I'm so passionate about, because this thing was going to marry all the worlds that I could think about, right? Because television, what I love to do, the Caribbean, everything. And I was like, yeah, this is the perfect opportunity. So I went home, I was a little bit despondent, and I was like, man, I don't understand why I didn't get that job. So anyways, we fast forward to about 2 to 3 months later, I get a call. Leroy, this is made for movie. Didn't hire me. This guy calls me up and he says, hey, you remember me? You interviewed with me. I said, of course I do, because that's where I wanted to go. He says, well, I deliberately did not hire you because I wanted to hold you for myself, because I'm moving to this new opportunity at BET, and at that time it was called BETJ, and I want you to come with me to BETJ.
Wow.
And I was like, yo, but at the time I needed the job, man. Like, I get it now, but I needed that job at the time. But he's like, no, you didn't even understand. After speaking to you, I wanted you specifically for myself, because I think you were going to be amazing for this opportunity that I'm going to have at BETJ. So he and I, just the two of us, decided to have a BETJ office. Now, at the time, BETJ was part of BET, and BET's head office was in DC. Now, BET did not have a New York presence at all. So just the two of us decided to set up an office in New York, where we would produce all of BET's material production in New York. And we created a whole lot of projects and stuff like that in New York, just the two of us, just hiring staff, renting offices and stuff like that. And so BETJ became Centric, which all of us, I think a lot of us know about. Centric is now BET Her, but it was just him and I creating a whole lot of content out of New York for BETJ, and BET obviously is part of the whole BET family. And so we started to integrate. Once they saw a lot of the material that we were producing and creating, BET proper now decided to integrate a lot of what we do to mainstream BET. So a lot of our shows now were starting to get onto BET proper and stuff like that. And so that's how we started to make a lot of noise and do a lot of stuff with it. And so that's how I ended up being part of BET. I was a fringe of BET on the side. We were like on the bench, we were like playing the game, but we were the bench warmers. But we started to make noise once we got a little break. The coach gave us a couple minutes to get into the game. So we made a lot of noise. We won a couple of awards and stuff like that. And then they're like, yo, they started to take notice that these guys over there doing some things, man, we got to get these guys on board. And so that's how we ended up at BET, and that's why I ended up at BET. It's a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, Felix, I could listen to your stories all day long. I have to tell you, I mean, it is just fascinating, the information that you're presenting to us. And I think it kind of speaks to, just
Absolutely.
staying open to opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
again, putting your best work out there, always being a consummate professional, even when
Yeah.
there's doubts and there's frustration and you feel, well, like you said, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just a bench warmer, and I'm going to be on the bench forever, that you still keep pushing and you
Yeah.
still keep trying, because when do you don't
Absolutely.
know when
You
the
have
coach
to
is
stay
going to
ready.
call you to be in the limelight. So you have to stay ready.
Absolutely.
So, as we're wrapping up our time together, I
You have
just
to
was
stay ready.
wondering if there was
Mm-hmm.
3 pieces of
Yeah.
advice you had to give to someone who's beginning the journey, or who's frustrated by not being where they would like to
Yeah.
be at this point. What would you say to them? What pieces of advice would you give to someone who feels like, you know, this is not going anywhere, they're frustrated, they're thinking of giving up?
Mhm. One of one of the major pieces of advice that I'd give anybody, and if we don't have time to even get to the others, but this one in particular, I think is key, and I think this is one of those that has worked that worked for me way back when. Is know exactly where you're going. Have a destination in mind.
Amen.
And I'll give you examples for that, right? And I've spoken to my kids and I've spoken to a lot of people about this thing. And I've always said, right, I knew exactly where I wanted to go. So I'll even break it down even further. I said, look, let's take for example that we go into Portsmouth, and I'll use Portsmouth in this context because we're speaking to I would imagine a majority Dominican audience. Let's say we go into Portsmouth, right? We know that that's our destination. Now, on the way to Portsmouth, we may stop in Maho and get a drink, or maybe not a drink, but the traffic in Maho is messed up. Okay, so the traffic might be backed up for a couple hours. We might have to stay there. Okay, we stayed there, but we know that once we're not done because we haven't gotten to Portsmouth yet, right? So we end up we got to Layu. After all is said and done, we got to Layu. Bridge is down. We have to go back to pass another road because we still trying to get to Portsmouth. So sometimes going forward involves going back.
So true.
Right? So because you're not at your destination yet, but you still gotta get to Portsmouth. So you're doing everything you can. Maybe the car that you out run out of money. There's no more gas, but you don't have any money to put in there. You got to figure out, how am I going to, do I continue on that same ride that I'm at? Do I find a ride with somebody else? What is the method of transportation that I'm going to continue to use to get to Portsmouth? Because you're not in Portsmouth yet, because that's the final goal. And that's the biggest advice that I give to people, is to know exactly where you want to go, because it may take a variety of methods and whatever amount of time, but you got to get there, because the satisfaction, which is what we all trying to get in life, is some level of satisfaction. Personal satisfaction is key, is the success of having achieved. Once you get to Portsmouth, it may not turn out to be the Portsmouth or whatever it is that you felt it could have been, whatever. But that's almost besides the point, because you achieved your goals and you fought through it to ensure that you achieved what it is that you set out that you were going to do. So that to me is, if nothing else, and I tell that to kids all the time, get a goal, figure out what you want to do. If you want to become a policeman, that's fine. Along the way, you may figure out, you know what, maybe I don't want to become a policeman, but I want to become a security guard, or I want to become a this. But you have a goal, so you're working towards it. Because, like I said earlier, once I knew that I wanted to get into communications, it put all of the things that I was doing at school into perspective for me, because I became a sponge for knowledge. Because at the time, like I said, I didn't know specifically what it was. So I figured a news reporter needed to know as wide a variety of things as possible. Somebody a question about science, you need to be able to have a conversation about this, a conversation about that, because I knew. So I started thinking about everything in that holistic view. Everything was put into perspective for me, because school now took a new meaning. It was easier because I knew what I was going to use, what it is that I was learning for now. I didn't have to be an expert on it, but I just needed to have an understanding of what it is that I need, or just curious enough to be able to ask the questions that leads me to the answers. All right. So again, I'm trying to concise a whole bunch of it for you, but that's kind of where my thinking is as far as that it is. The other one is, again, it kind of incorporates what I just mentioned, but just to be positive, because everything is not always going to work out the way that you want it to work out. It is just not. This is not the world that we're living in, and especially today, in light of to mention all of it, it's not always going to work on. And the first sign of negativity, you cannot quit. I remember as a news reporter when we first started talking about stress management in Dominica. This was something that was novel to most of us because we all knew that, okay, when you go to work, it's not going to be a good day. It's not going to be a good day. We just deal with it. There wasn't that certain level of, oh my God, like, what am I going to do?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, but I remember specifically when we started having news conferences about, stress management in the workplace. So you just got to be positive. And I think the last one that the last advice I would tell people is always be willing to give back and to share.
So true.
I don't profess to have a whole lot of wisdom. I think I have enough to make me very efficient in what I do. But I'm not the greatest photographer on the planet. I don't profess to be. I know what I want out of a certain photograph that I'm trying to do. I know what I want out of a certain situation. And so I invite people all the time. Friends come over, a lot of guys or people from Dominica who call and say, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? And stuff like that. And I'm always willing to teach, you know. I got a lot of celebrity clients and a lot of people who I do work with. And part of how they became drawn to me was not because I was necessarily, like I said, the best at it, period. But what I bring to the table and what I brought to a lot of them was a certain level of compassion in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding. It's a little bit of just being naive, but naive in a good way that
Mm-hmm.
I'm so naive about you. And so I want to learn. I want to know, who are you? Like, but I don't care about the celebrity aspect of you. I want to know you as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what's more interesting to me. Like, forget about all the this and all the stuff, because I always tell all of these clients that the only thing that you have above me is that you have a whole lot more money than me. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. But at the end of the day, you're just as I am. You bleed just like me. You understand what I'm saying? So once we're done, you go this way, I'm gonna go that way. That's it. You got a whole lot more money in the bank than me, and that's it. And so they that kind of resonated with them, and so they respected the fact that I treated them as a, hey, I call them and I say, hey, we're meeting tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and that's it. And so these are, in summary, again, I know we don't have an infinite amount of time, but in summary, some of the things that I'd like to impart to anybody listening to this is,
Yeah, and now
just those 3 points. I mean, there's a whole lot more. Mm-hmm.
And then speaking of photography, tell us what's going on with you now, because I know that you eventually ventured out on your own. So what's going on with you? How can we get in touch with you? Promote yourself. Let us know what's going on, and if we wanted to get in touch with you, how we would do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret. Hopefully, it shouldn't be that COVID and everything else has devastated the economy. And again, if we even look at what's going on right now with, Black Lives Matter and all those stuff, so there really isn't a lot of stuff happening right now. But I think, adversity gives you an opportunity to reinvent yourself sometimes. And it is good to start to think. And so one of the things that I've been doing over the past couple of weeks, since a lot of people have to do social distancing, is I do what I call a photography drive-by. And so people who have needs, like graduations and birthdays and that kind of stuff, I meet them in front of their house, at the corner, at the back of their house, or somewhere with, and I take on my big lens, one of these or another one, and then I give them the same treatment. We get their photos, we get them anything they need. Because I think even after 2020 is over, we're still going to need to remember a lot of what happened in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And some of what happened in 20 might have been a graduation. You're going to have a birthday regardless.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be like 2020 is not going to have a birthday. You're going to have a birthday.
Right.
And you might want to remember 2020 birthday, so you need to chronicle it. That's what it is. Obviously, the majority of the work that I do a lot of the times is with Chase. Right now, everybody is working from home, and a lot of the activities that we've had is not happening anymore. So, I think like everybody else around the country, it's rough going, and that's why I think it's critical that we reinvent ourselves. But it also gives you a little bit of time to strategize, to learn. I mean, you'd be amazed at the amount of new things that I've learned. In my house, I get up in the morning, and after I'm done with my early morning walk, I come down on my computer like I'm going to work. Mm-hmm. And I go on YouTube or wherever, and I look for a course of some kind or something, mm-hmm. and I teach myself a new something, or look to see how the other people are doing it, because these are things that typically I might not have had the time to do prior, so now it's an opportunity to be able to do some of that. So, but again, if you need my services, I like I said, I always help with people, and I work with all different types of budgets. I know sometimes some people don't have the JP Morgan Chase budget, or my website is in development, but I think the easiest way for people to get in touch with me is either through Facebook or Instagram. It's Felix, Felixx, Felixx, or Facebook is I'm pretty much very visible on Facebook, so you can always get me that way. Just send me a message, even if I don't respond the very minute, but I try and make an effort to respond as soon as I can. And we can talk and see how it is that I can help. I will respond, because I think absolutely. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's certainly been a pleasure. I think I kind of got lost in your storytelling, and if it wasn't true, I wouldn't believe it. If I saw this in a movie, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But it's certainly, I've known you all these years, and I did not know how fascinating a story that you've lived. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And I look forward to speaking with you again and continue all the great work you're doing, especially with posting stuff on Facebook, especially in the Dominica food group.
Yeah.
I certainly enjoy all the meals that you post in the Dominica food group. So it was great speaking with you, and hopefully we'll be in touch soon, okay?
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you do. I think there is an opportunity for a lot of people to benefit from the good that you're doing right now.
Thank you.
Especially in these times. So
thank you.
I really appreciate it. Everybody who will listen to this, and anybody everywhere, be safe. COVID is still around. Listen to the professionals, and just have a good year.
All right. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
All righty. All righty. Take care. Bye-bye.